Buckle up, everyone. For the first time in 10 seasons, I am about to break one of my personal rules. Today's topic, Jacob deGrom, what we can learn from him, why I am confused about how this could have happened, and mostly how we can use this as a teaching moment for coaches and pitchers of any age. I am Angel Borrelli, and welcome to Angel Borrelli Pitching and Season 10, Episode 5 of The Fix. I am here with my co-host, former minor league pitcher, Joe Demers. Hi, Joe. Welcome back, and thank you for being here. How are you today?
Hi, Angel. I'm great. I'm excited for another episode, and I'm excited to hear what rule you're going to be breaking.
Well, you know how I am. So everyone, you've been listening to me for 10 years, and unless I have something good to say, like in my eye candy segment, I very rarely, in fact, I can't remember when I've ever talked about a pitcher, even when he's been injured, because of the great respect I have for pitchers. And because I work with pitchers, I have to look in their eyes every day. I've never believed in taking a pitcher and chopping him up, critiquing him publicly. And you know that, Joe. And
Absolutely.
I just have this respect for pitchers.
It's a great quality.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I want, first of all, everything is based on trust when it comes to working with somebody's body. And also, I look at Jacob and I'm like, this is somebody's son.
Mm-hmm.
This is somebody's maybe husband or boyfriend. This is somebody's father, maybe. I mean, he's a man. He's a human being. And I know what it takes to be a pitcher. And it's why I decided to work with them. But I'll tell you, Joe, I have not been the same since the day I saw him cry when they
Yeah,
interviewed him.
you could tell he's going through a rough time right now.
Yes. And you could feel the hopelessness.
Mm-hmm.
And just I was so affected by it, and it was reminding me of how I actually got into this business, which was, I was called. I mean, when I worked and looked up into the eyes of the first pitcher referred to me when I was a strength coach in 1995, and I had to help him. And then when I started doing the research and saw how crazy things were being done, and as I learned more, I was called, and it was the strangest calling, and it was the calling of that I have to help. And way back then, pitchers didn't even lift weights. So I was always on the cutting edge of doing something different, but I was so dialed into them. And it's why, as everyone knows, I gave up while I was in graduate school, all my other athletic clients and decided to focus. So since 1995, that's all I've done is work with pitchers. And I work with them one-on-one. And that's a whole different type of relationship.
Definitely.
And also it struck me because I started to have feelings about my profession and I'm not sure how this could have happened. It's sort of like waiting around for someone to care about how a pitcher does what he does, not just what he's doing. Like he's throwing strikes, great. He's getting outs, great. Meanwhile, the way he's doing it is not good. And then that pitcher ends up injured, sometimes more than once, loses his career.
Yeah.
So I've been waiting for that. And you know what? I've been excited. I don't know if I watch a lot of baseball shows in the morning to get caught up. And in the last 2 months on MLB Central, Tom Verducci, one of the best reporters in baseball, Al Leiter, an ex-pitcher, both of them were talking about the late arm. They didn't go into detail, but they said, yeah, well, if you have a late arm, you're going to get injured. And I went, oh my God, late arm. That's part of what we do in biomechanics. We talk about when an arm is in the right place. This is exciting. And then Al Leiter one day, while he didn't do it perfectly, he was on track. He was talking about the segments of rotation. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he read my book. And then I was laughing to myself. This is the first time I've heard even a reference to the way the delivery is done. And I was so excited. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, things are starting to change. And then I start reading articles. New teams are adding biomechanists. Another company has come out where they're not going to just measure angles, they're going to measure acceleration forces and blah, blah, blah. And it's still biomechanics, it's still the numbers part of the industry, but it at least is telling me that maybe they care. And then when they were talking about stealing signs, they were mentioning that they're installing all these cameras on the pitcher, and one field has 8 cameras that can see everything. And even though they were talking about, hey, they could see the blood vessels in his hand, so they knew he was throwing a split finger pitch, they were also saying the reason for the cameras is to double check on the way, the forces, et cetera. And I said, oh my gosh, here we go again. And I said, are things changing? And I was so excited about it. And even though I feel like there needs to be more done, the fact that it even was being brought up was exciting to me. And Joe, I don't know if you understand the field of biomechanics. So kinesiology is the study of human movement.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you study what I study, you study in the Department of Kinesiology.
Okay.
Biomechanics is where we actually analyze the movement. And biomechanics quantitative is what they measure angles. So a quantitative report is going to show each position, where joints need to be at the certain time, what angle they're at, and then they're going to also measure rotational velocity and different things. So you're going to get a numbers report that's going to tell you you're on or off. It's also going to tell you where you fall in the norms. Qualitative is where you're able to look at the motion to see the quality of the performance and also to see the other nuances of the pitcher that may be contributing to what is right or to what is wrong. Now, when was in graduate school, that's when I met Dr. Glenn Fleissig, who runs the ASMI, the American Sports Medicine Institute, and he is the master at biomechanics. They set out all the guidelines. And in graduate school, I contacted him and he was my mentor. And I think of him every day. And I started going to their conferences, and it's all medical stuff.
Yeah.
But it's from that we get the guidelines. So with everything I'm going to say today, this is because of how well trained I was by these experts around me. And Glenn has been great.
And when was this? When did you start working with him?
And when I was in graduate school, I was so naive, and I kept seeing his name coming up on research. And I called him. I was like so gutsy. I just called him and said, "Hey, I'm a graduate student." He sent me his PhD thesis. I still have it. I looked
Oh,
at it
wow.
the other day.
And baseball is just now getting into all this.
Well, they started doing consulting, and they've always done baseball. In fact, I would go to the baseball conferences, but they're starting when data started showing up. That's when this was allowed even more. And this fits in with data.
Totally.
Businesses love numbers. That's why quantitative analysis is way easier to sell to a team than what I do. And it's crazy because without what I do, you can't just apply the numbers. You got to see more. In fact, the number one chapter in my thesis was putting the pitcher back into the pitch, meaning this isn't just a bunch of numbers. This guy can be getting strikes like Jacob, throwing strikes, being amazing, but look what's happening.
Yeah, the analytics are great, but if you don't know how to fix it, and then it's worthless.
Exactly. And this is true even for spin rate. So my client's coming to me, how can I get more spin rate? I go, what's going on? The next thing I want to know is, well, tell me about the pitch. Is it working? No, it's missing. Well, which way is it missing? It's missing away. Okay, let me look. I film the pitch he's talking about. Hey, look at your wrist. Your fingers aren't behind the ball. Boom. Starts locating it. The catcher shakes his head and said, the spin's perfect. Blah, blah,
And the
blah.
spin rate's up.
Exactly, which I don't measure, but see, I don't need to, because if it's spinning right. So here's the thing. We can't just look at data. And what worries me is being so good at being able to say, you have a problem, your spin rate's down, or even with hitters, your exit velocity's down, and not really having a solution that can couple with that. So when everything started coming up with Jacob, I'm like, what is going on with him? Now, I don't analyze other pitchers' mechanics. I've got enough analysis going on with my clients. But when I watch these shows, they show still shots. And in a still shot, I can see is everything in the right place at the right time. And so when he first went on the IL, they said they were showing some shots of him. And of course, for weeks, all they were talking about is he's on the IL again. He's always on the IL. They were always prefacing how great he was with when he's healthy. And I'm listening to this going, if this is such a pattern, how come nobody's intervened to go, well, what's going on here?
Exactly.
Then I started seeing photos. And I'm going, wait a minute, this can't be right. Something's not right here. And if I'm seeing this, how come somebody else isn't seeing it? And if they don't know what's happening, well, that means they're going to rehab him, and then he's going to go out and try to play catch, and he's going to play catch with the same error. And then guess what? He's going to hurt himself more. And before you know it,
That's exactly what happened.
exactly. And also, it's debilitating to the pitcher. He looked on that report, which I will never forget, when they were interviewing him and he broke down. He looked, I don't know, the way a person looks when they don't understand something and they don't have enough information as to why this happens. The why is very simple if you understand mechanics. So for him, it's not just what happened to his body, but it's what happens to his head and also the way that it looks to the world, because no matter what, the MLB sets the standard. The young kids watch it. They try to emulate players.
Yeah. What did you see in the mechanics?
Well, yeah. So what I saw is that science is very clear on this. There's a position. So just to review with everyone. So when the pitcher comes out of the glove and he strides forward, there is a moment in science called stride foot contact. And that is when the front foot touches down, not when it's flat, when it touches down. And then the arm has to be in a specific position, which I'll go over in a second. And that position is critical because the shoulder has to go through a rotation and it's going in one direction while the body rotates into the next important position, which is what we call max external rotation. And this is when, if you're standing behind the catcher, you're looking at the pitcher, his body's square, and his arm looks like this is where people in the world say, oh, his forearm's laying way back. And that is called max external. It's the moment prior to acceleration. So the body has turned, the muscles around the shoulder are stretching, and that stretch effect converts into the acceleration. So that position right there is critical because that's where you're getting tons of forces. Forces are accumulating through the motion, but right there, they're huge. And plus, that's your money. That's the money phase of pitching. Whatever you get there, that's going to convert to acceleration. In that position, his forearm was laying on top of his upper arm with the ball behind his head, and his body was in position to throw. In other words, his body had arrived and his arm should have been in a different angle completely, and it wasn't, which meant he would have to add another moment to get the ball ready to throw. And in that moment, of making an adjustment so that he could throw the ball, it would clear from behind his head. In that moment, when you do that, because of the way the bones of the forearm are, your forearm goes through an unnecessary rotational thing. Your wrist ends up not behind the ball. And then the next thing that happens is the pitcher, and the better he is, the more he's going to be able to do that. He has to do some unusual adjustments at the last second, which I know he has to do. Otherwise, he's not going to throw strikes. Based on how good he is, he must be doing this because you cannot make a certain position or movement with the forearm, the upper arm, and the elbow without having the forearm bones respond in a certain way. So what this does is it makes extra work. The other thing is the position his arm was in, and this is from a photo I took. It was the last pitch he threw before the trainers came out to the mound. And that position there's been some wonderful research done on this. Again, this is something I learned, and Sherry Werner is one of my favorite researchers in baseball. There was an article I'll never forget, and I remember talking to Glenn about it. And it's excessive flexion at that moment. What that means is when his forearm was dropped on top of his upper arm, he had too much flexion in the elbow. That would be like if you do a dumbbell curl. You know, Joe, remember when we do a dumbbell curl, you might come all the way up to the top. I'd say don't come up so high because
Mm-hmm.
when you're up at the top, you're collapsed. In other words, you could bring the dumbbell
It's just
all the way
resting.
up and just rest it. Exactly, which means that number one, you've got no muscles working. Number two, when you go to start again, they have to fire that you're like starting the movement and you're on your way down and gravity's pulling. So it's we in weights, you want to keep tension on the muscle.
So that's more pressure on the ligaments when you do that?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Well, so what happens is the muscles in that position. So what the exact words are in science is excessive flexion increases the moment of inertia around the shoulder. Inertia is the movement, not wanting to move, fighting moving. And so what that means is the shoulder, which is getting ready to rotate, and you're trying to rotate it because you're trying to go into external rotation, it is being tightened up by the position of the arm. So you get so excessive flexion tightens up the rotational component of the shoulder, which means the thing that you need to be doing and you're trying to do is not happening easily. So that's the first thing that happens. Second is what we want is joint stability. And he's had surgery on his, he had Tommy John. And so the thing is, you want stability around the all the joints when you're pitching. And why do we want stability? In fact, why do we want these angles? We want these angles because we know that the structures at certain angles of the bones are tighter and they're stronger and they're more able to protect the structures of the bone, of the ligaments. When you have an arm that is completely flexed and falling in the moment when you're rotating into position, you have things that have shut down. You have things that are not acting. And muscle mechanics, there's insufficiency rules, meaning that if you get into certain angles where you pull your bones too far apart or they're collapsed on each other, the muscles literally shut down. And that's why sometimes if you're down on your knees or you're in a weird position on the floor, you go to get up and it's like, ouch. That's because the angles you were in didn't allow the action in the muscle to occur. So for that first movement, you're like, ouch, because your muscles literally had to turn on at the last second. So these are rules of muscle mechanics. So when we talk about angles, us analysts, we're not just pulling this out of thin air like, oh, this looks good. No, it's because there's structural integrity. And if you don't have structural integrity, so in this photo, he had no structural integrity in his arm.
And that's key to staying healthy.
Exactly. So what I did is I said, wow, his arm is really late there. So then lo and behold, within an hour, they showed another angle and he had the same uniform on. So I think it was the same game because they switched uniforms and it looked like the same game. And I think they were talking about it. He was in a sideways position. And even though I couldn't see his feet, and when we analyze, we have to see all body parts, his hips were rotated. I could see his hips, and I could infer from the degree of rotation of his pelvis that he was already in the rotational phase. In other words, he had touched down and he was turning. His arm wasn't anywhere near the stride foot contact phase. So then I said, oh, his arm was straight back towards the outfield. In fact, it wasn't even at shoulder height, I don't think, or maybe just a little below. In other words, I could infer very easily that his arm at stride foot contact is late. So now, what do we have when that happens? That means, and when we say something's late, that's because that's the terminology. But something could be early. In other words, his body could have been going so fast that his didn't give his arm enough time. In fact, I worry about the pitch clock. Even though they're doing research saying injuries haven't gone up since the pitch clock, I have seen tons of pitchers that are really good. And when I see the still shots, in fact, I take photos of it because I'm like looking at it. There's tons of late arms at stride foot contact right now. My head is thinking, as a qualitative analyst and a performance specialist, I'm like, I wonder if there is a sensation of rushing. And if you have a sensation of rushing, you're usually going to rush your legs and body, and the
Yeah,
arm cannot keep up with it. What do you think about that?
that's interesting. I hear late arm all the time, but you never hear early lower half.
Yes, yes. And
Sometimes that could be the problem. It might not be your arm; it might be your lower half that's rushing.
exactly. And that's what qualitative analysis does.
Yeah.
It looks to see, why is this happening? This could be the way the pitcher's lowering his knee.
Hmm.
There is a reason, and the thing is with injuries, and this is why I wanted to talk about this. There is a reason for all of the things that occur in the motion. You've got to find the cause. So that's why when I saw his arm, I'm like, how am I going to figure this out? I want to know. And then I saw his late arm. So then I happened to see some other photos from other games. And sure enough, I said, you know what? He's got a timing problem. Now, why am I not saying late arm problem? Well, it is a late arm problem. And his arm is collapsed at max external rotation. The ball's not ready, and he has to come through with his arm at a funny angle. And then lo and behold, I saw a photo of that, and it was a funny angle, and his forearm looked funny, and his wrist looked funny. So 5 minutes later, after I do that, I see that. I said, you know what? I want to do some research on him just to see, when did this injury occur, and just to refresh my memory. And guess what? He first started complaining of wrist problems
Before he went on the IL.
before.
Oh
Then it
wow.
was forearm tightness.
Mm,
These were little things that were happening.
yeah.
Wrist, forearm, now elbow surgery. Now, everyone knows how I am about the wrist. I mean, I wrote a whole book on protecting the wrist and the forearm and the fingers, how important they are. Remember that the finger muscles go through the wrist controls the fingers. The wrist is responsible for about 21% of the velocity. You could take that with, I mean, they wonderful researchers again in biomechanics. They do these studies, and we don't want to take to the bank it's exactly 21%, but it is the last joint that imparts velocity to the ball. And those muscles that cross there come up into the middle of the elbow. And that's all forearm, wrist, finger stuff. So, with what I just said and with the pattern, of course, I'm saying, why did this happen? How could this happen? If you have cameras, if you have analysis, you have the video of the last pitch he threw. Although I'm thinking this wasn't just that day. And see, these are things I don't know. I don't know the answers, so I can't be definitive, but I do know this. Jacob, you're not done. All you have to do is take a look at some of these issues. That's my message to him and to any pitcher, that if you have an injury that keeps recurring, don't give up. It's not over yet. There's more information. You just haven't, one, found it, two, been tenacious enough to stick with it. Now, I do know that after surgery, you need to get on your arms like crazy with weights. And Joe, you've never had an arm problem, and we have always trained your arms. We train it specifically at certain times. We make sure the stability of the elbows there. We make sure your forearm's good.
Yeah.
I did hear, in fact, they said this in the report, that he's not a guy that likes to hit the gym. I don't know if that's true. This is what they said. They said he likes to do his own thing. Well, Jacob, and to anybody else out there, if you've had surgery and you don't train your arms like crazy, and your wrists and your forearms, and don't listen to the BS about it makes you too tight. This is what they said in 1995 when I first went to coaches. Can I have your team? I'm a graduate student. I want to put them in the gym. Our pitchers too? No way. Aren't they going to get tight? Just because you look at bodybuilders that are overblown and they look like they can't move, don't blame lifting weights and think that that's going to happen to everyone. Lifting weights, in order to do it, you have to work each muscle correctly. And plus, if you go through the right range of motion, plus you're training and throwing. And trust me, this is not a problem. Just look at some of the pitchers that are huge. And in fact, more are getting bigger every day. And you know what? It's about time, because you're the ones with the injuries. You have to have integrity. You cannot train ligaments. You can't train tendons. And when I say that, there is an effective training, but we don't kind of go, oh, I'm going to train this ligament and it's going to keep from being injured. No, you train the muscles around it so the forces don't break down and get through to the bottom level. The bones, the ligaments, tendons, the bones and ligaments are at the bottom. The muscles go into the bones through the tendon. We want to protect the bone and ligament. That's your structure. And the best way to do it is with training the muscles so they can be protective. And how do you train the muscles? It depends on the position you're playing. And with pitchers, they have to be trained. And how do you know what needs some extra attention? You look at his mechanics. If your front leg is falling all over because it can't stabilize you as you're going over the front leg, well, guess what? If that leg's unstable, it's going to put more forces on your elbow. Now, what's great about deGrom, and it's why we all think he's so great, is look how clean he looks. So this is a guy who cares about his body and about his movement. He's got clean mechanics. I actually was shocked when I actually saw these still shots. But then I said, you know what? For him to be that good, he has to do some extra configuration at the last second to bring his hand back around the ball. And I saw a photo of him releasing the ball, and Joe, his arm looked like, you know how I talk about delivering a pizza where the wrist, like under the ball, you know how sometimes your hand would get caught under your slider?
Yeah.
Yeah, it had that look of being under the ball, which would be consistent with that you had to stick the elbow out.
Yeah.
And you had to, and then when you stick the elbow out, your forearm actually changes its position. So anyway, you know, Joe, what do you think about my giving a description of the stride foot contact and just what the position is that we want to see? Because coaches, I want you to go behind the catcher and I want you to catch, pardon the pun, catch every pitcher that has got the ball stuck behind his head. And I want to tell you what you're going to look for and how we can actually deal with this. So do you think using the L explanation would be something that the audience would get?
Yeah.
The letter. Okay. Everyone, so just picture this or go ahead and do this. Please don't do it while you're driving. And I want to do this as a righty because I have a feeling some of you are going to be going to see some photos of Jacob, and I want you to see what I'm talking about. So as a righty, put your arm up and make the capital letter L. So if I'm looking at someone doing this, I'm seeing the letter L. And so that means the upper arm. So you've got an upper arm and a lower arm. The upper arm is controlled by the shoulder joint, and the shoulder joint moves the arm everywhere it goes. The elbow joint, all it does is lengthen and shorten the arm. It doesn't do anything else. And where the hand goes, how far away from it goes, is done by the shoulder pushing the hand out. And the elbow is assisting with lengthening or staying short to control how far or where the hand goes. Put the arm up in a letter L, and then that is a certain position. So now your forearm is perpendicular to the sky. Your fingertips are pointing to the sky. Your upper arm is at a 90-degree angle. So if you look at your body, if you're doing this in the mirror and you look at your upper arm, that's like a 90-degree angle. The arm's at shoulder height. Now you've got a 90-degree pure angle with the forearm. Now, look at your forearm, angle the forearm down, and that means you're actually rotating the shoulder. So you've got the baseball. The baseball is like I always say it's a baseball in the shoulder joint. It's a ball. Rotate that whole arm downward and look over. And if your arm were the hand of a clock, it would be at 10.
So now my palm is facing the ground?
Yes, and it's on an angle facing 10 o'clock if it's a clock.
Okay.
Okay. I'm not going to talk degrees because it doesn't, we need something a little simpler. Okay. That is the position of the arm at stride foot contact. I'm going to go back to why we want this in a second. Now I want you to go back to the position you started in. Now your body has started external rotation and you are externally rotated, but that's not enough for pitching. Now, roll the arm backward. Joe, you're going to have way more than me. You actually have tons.
Mm-hmm.
I have some because I do this all day long. And for normal people out there, you might not have much. But now the ball, if it was in your hand, would be facing the sky. That's external rotation. Now, when you land, your arm is in that first position number 1, 10 o'clock. As you start to turn your hips, which are turning in towards the hitting direction, in towards your throwing direction, your arm is going backwards up to that second position facing perpendicular. And then as you complete the rotation of your body, the arm is in the backward position, the external rotation. Therefore, you have taken a letter L, you have leaned it forward, then you've got a perfect L in the middle, then you've got an L laying down behind you. Now, let's just say it takes 3 beats to do that. Let's see, you go down is 1, you come out, you're at the 1 position, you go to 2, you go back to 3. When your body is turning, it should be in the sideways position when your arm is in its internal rotation position. It should be sideways. Am I saying that clear, Joe? So stride foot contact position has the arm down pointing to the 10 o'clock. The body should be sideways. I want to be clear on this. Now, Now everything's going to start to happen, and this is what we call the rotational phase. The arm starts to move into its perpendicular position as the hips rotate forward. And the same number of beats that it takes to turn your body towards the plate, and by the way, it's doing it in 3 segments, the pelvis, the trunk, the upper trunk. The arm is doing it in 3 segments. So there's a perfect timing of 1, 2, 3 to get the arm back, 1, 2, 3 to face the plate. Boom, there you are. You're in that perfect 90-degree position of the arm. And by the way, you don't stop there. The rotation of the body is putting the arm there, and then you keep on going. So We need that. Now, here's the trick. When you're rotating, because of the shape of the bones of the elbow, that L is not as pure. The forearm starts to move in a little. That's because it's clearing the bones. But the pitcher cannot be weak and allow it, therefore, to just fall inward.
Which is what deGrom was doing.
Yes, and which a lot of pitchers do, because you have to have strength, because what you're doing is fighting one. The minute that forearm starts to angle inward towards your head while you're rotating, and you can't help that, there's going to be a little. Gravity takes over and wants to pull that limb down. Plus, you have all kinds of other forces, which I'm not even going to pretend to be able to say, that are working to like bring that limb in. And when that limb falls inward, you end up coming too far inward. You can't get back to your L position. Your body's done its rotation perfectly, but now the arm's behind. Now, that's one thing that can happen. So you could be perfect at stride foot contact, but then get in a mess when you're rotating. Now, we know that can happen. That can happen to anyone. That's why the pitcher needs to understand arm positioning and have the strength to stabilize that angle in the elbow joint. Now, if you also have a late arm at stride foot contact, now you're rotating while the arm is trying to shorten. Listen, I saw a photo of him, Joe. It was the most perfect stride foot contact arm angle. It was gorgeous.
Yeah, it's got to be to throw that hard.
Yes, but his body was already rotated. He was halfway through it. That's when I started putting the pieces together. So if you're late, what you're going to do, which is what he had to do to get to that perfect arm, he had to be shortening his arm while his body was rotating, meaning now the synchronicity of the rotation of the shoulder backward and the rotation of the body forward is off. And where do you pay the price? You pay the price when you're, boom, here I am, I've turned, I'm ready to throw the ball. Oops, the ball's not ready. So then you have to move your arm. You usually, at that point, you're going to lead with the elbow. You're going to do some other weird thing, leading with the elbow, coming in, doing whatever you can, over rotating your body. You're creating an extra beat because you got to get the ball in line to throw. All of that causes things to be overstretching, overcontracting, overpulling. It creates other issues. And with highly skilled pitchers, if they practice this enough, you can practice anything you want. And if you practice it enough, you can do it. That's why we see pitchers who are great, even though in science we look and go, oh my, how's his knee not breaking? How's his bones not breaking? We can see that. But I remember one of my best professors when I was studying motor control, Dr. Sawyer, and he said, if you practice anything enough, you can do it.
Yeah.
And even if it's wrong. So you have a highly developed pitcher. Younger pitchers don't get away with this. So coaches, this is when you see pitches being missed. You see funny spin on the ball, because if they're leading with the elbow, the forearm rotates. They don't know how to get their wrist back behind the ball. So with youth pitchers, you're going to see funky things with the ball. And when you see funky things with the ball, the first thing you should say is, if the ball's funky, the wrist is funky. If the wrist is funky, the forearm is funky. What's he doing with his shoulder? And stand behind the catcher. And if you see the ball behind the head, next thing you do is you go look and see, well, his arm is in a weird position and it's late. It's not on time. Well, where is his arm when he comes out of the glove and lands? And then you can put the pieces together, and at least you can understand where you need to make the adjustment. You don't adjust Jacob. He needs to understand all these things. And who knows, by some miracle or some wonderful thing, maybe somebody did see all this, and maybe they have talked to him, and maybe this will be what he works on. I'm praying. But the fact he's been doing this, it looks like he's good at this, and it's making me think he's been doing it. And these are the kind of protective measures. Don't just put cameras up to protect signs being stolen. How about let's look at our great pictures and say, hey, you know what? This won't change you except for the better, but we got to get you, your timing's a tiny bit off. They're practicing anyway.
Yeah.
And everybody thinks this is going to make this change to where they won't throw strikes. But look what's happening. Well, he's not throwing strikes now. He's not throwing balls now. He's not even throwing a ball now. So there's the risk reward. And as I said, I don't usually use pitchers as an example. I am hoping to put this out into the universe that somehow, some way, coaches and pitchers will start to think about that when you get soreness and when you get injuries, it can get this bad. And if it can get this bad for somebody so good, it can get this bad for you too.
Yeah. And just because you're having success doesn't mean you shouldn't be working on mechanics still, you know?
Well, you should be definitely, and definitely you should always be on top of your weaknesses. I mean, the pitchers that come to me are great pitchers, but they always want to get better and they're able to get better. But I'll tell you, I have the most highly motivated pitchers when the minute they get an ache or a pain, then they're in a second and they're trying to fix. Or if their ball isn't doing what they want, it's not only doing what they want, but it's like this consistent miss, but yet they're really good with everything else. They're like, this can't, I can't have this be happening. And so it's highly motivational. So if your body's talking to you or your pitch is talking to you, you need to look at it. If you're perfect and you're perfect all the time, well, you might not be having any problems, but the body always wins and the ball will tell you what you're doing with your body. Okay, so I'm going to go through a little checklist for all you coaches, and here's what you want to do. First, I want you to look for that dangerous position of the ball behind the head. Second, I want you to look to see, well, where does that start from? Look to see if the arm is late at stride foot contact. If it's late there, that's where you make the adjustment. If it's not late there, then your adjustment has to come from during rotation, where it then means his arm is losing its integrity and its shape while he's rotating. The position of the ball behind the head is produced prior to that position. The body is either collapsing too far, the forearm is, to where it can't get into position, and that happens from something he's doing during rotation. If the arm is late at stride foot contact, that's going to cause the rest. And you only make one adjustment and then you see how it affects the rest. Usually, the late arm at stride foot contact will correct, especially in a good pitcher, the position of the arm at max external. And just for everybody to remember, I have been doing this for 10 years. And if you go through the teaching moments on my YouTube channel, I have a podcast on the stride and how to maintain the sideways frontal plane motion, which is critical to making sure the arm isn't late or the body getting ahead. I have a podcast on the stride foot contact arm and how to teach it and how to work with it. I have a podcast on rotation, and these are all with visuals. That's why you have to go to YouTube to see them. I have a podcast on scapular control. Pitchers should pitch from their scapula. And if any of these problems are happening, it affects the way the shoulder blades are working. And then you're ending up with a lot of things that are happening at the level of velocity and the ball release. So that's a great, great podcast to watch. And then lastly, Joe, you remember this one. We did a great podcast on leading with the elbow. And Joe was actually standing there outside of the dugout, and we were describing what it's like and how the release is. And it's much easier to see this with a static positions than it is when you see somebody moving.
Definitely.
Yeah. So anyway, so Joe, do you think the audience has gotten clear on this?
Yeah, I think you covered it well, Angel.
Yeah. So anyway, Jacob, if you're out there, get our good vibes. I know the universe will send them to you. We're in your corner. And why does Jacob need to know all this stuff? hopefully they've already gone over this with him, because knowing what happened and what causes things puts you back in the driver's seat.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you just walk around every day wondering, when is it going to happen next? Or could it happen to me? That's the purpose of this podcast. I want all of you in the driver's seat. So any of you out there that have had this recurring problem, and I know there's pitchers out there that are in the same boat, we can thank Jacob for giving us an example of, or giving us a moment where we can learn and hopefully improve from it. So anyway, Joe, thanks so much for being here today. You helped make things clear.
Well, I'm glad I can help.
So everyone, thank you for listening, and I'll be talking to you in 3 weeks.